everyone, and good morning to Justin. So welcome to our first international session for the KKU-iLT activities. And we are excited here today to have Dr. Justin Kreuter from Mayo Clinic in the US. He's going to share his story about fostering a community of practice, real life experience, something that he has done himself. And maybe we can learn some lessons from his presentation, and we can adapt the lessons to use in our own settings. Dr. Kreuter is a transfusion pathologist at the Mayo Clinic in the US. So please, Dr. Kreuter, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Really appreciate the opportunity to connect with your community and talk about this community of practice, what we have done with the Harvard Macy education community and the collaborations that have been about. So just to share about myself, you know, I'm a pathologist is my day job, and I've also started the Harvard Macy tweet chat, which is what I'm going to be talking with you today. I'm active on social media if anybody wants to connect with me. And because I have a difficult last name, I've gone and created an alias for myself as the Bowtie Bandit of Blood, since I'm a transfusion medicine physician. So if you search Bowtie Bandit of Blood, you will find me. You don't have to remember how to spell my last name. So for today, I really have two objectives that I want to try to focus. First, I want to talk about kind of that opportunity and potential that is present in developing and cultivating a community of practice for educators. And then second, I want to tell the story of how we did it with the Harvard Macy group and show you both examples and data of this success that we had. Maybe I should also mention in university, I studied community community psychology. And so that also is a background that I brought to this work. So I guess the first question is, why are communities of practice important? They almost seem like fleeting ideas, or they're not something tangible. And from my point of view, I think it really is about creating something that is going to sustain and continue forward in time. And so I give you an example. At Mayo Clinic, they have a lot of interest in supporting physician well-being as a big point of concern and topic in the United States. And in one of the efforts that the institution has done is they will support physicians getting together and going out for a meal together and having conversation. This is the group that I went out with. So we're a number of different physicians, and this group, we met, I think, maybe 3 times. And it was just like for a few months, and then it sort of, you know, the funding was still there, but the challenges of time, the challenges of organizing schedule, it just fell apart. I could go to these colleagues today, and every single one of them will say, yeah, we should get that back going again. But there is a high bar of investment that is needed, and there doesn't seem to be this sustainability. And that's where I think this community of practice really comes in. So, you know, this is an example. The tweet chat that I started is this HMI chat that you see here. You see Adapong has been, you know, a member of this community from the start. To be truthful, he was the mentor for the 3 of us that started this. And we started it in 2016. So, this is documentation that, I think that's 6 years later. He's still active. The community is still active. And truth be told, we just had our most recent one. We always meet the first Wednesday of the month, and it's still continuing to this day. And it's not something that Harvard Macy supports with people involved earning a salary. It is this community of practice approach and lens that we started with that is sustaining this with discretionary or voluntary effort from the people in the community. People in the community want to show up and devote their time to this. So I think that's the magic of this community of practice approach. Is it is setting up for success with sustaining and persisting over time. So next, I want to pivot and talk about what's important to understand about practice of communities of practice. If we're going to do this here or at your institution and your community, what are some important things to know? I mean, first thing is to understand what it is. So it's a group of people who share a common concern, passion, a common practice. From what I understand from Edipong, I mean, that might be education, might be the thread that pulls this group together. Or you might have other groups. Before this session started, we were talking with one gentleman about the opportunities of connecting 12th grade students internationally and helping them to cultivate an international relationship. So whatever that common thread is, that's the important thing. Is there is one thread that is the focus that brings people together. There certainly can be other diversity things, but the community of practice really has a central focus. And it's that shared interest that is really driving people to want to connect. People show up because they want to reconnect with the community. And what's good about the community is those relationships over who is teacher, who is student, is constantly changing and in flux. We bring things to the group to share what we know, what we've been thinking about, our perspectives, and we learn from others that similarly bring their perspectives. What things are they doing to the group? Recently it's been really exciting with what are opportunities for, let's see if this, there we go, with virtual and online that has come about recently, right? Because this is augmented this ability to cross time and distance. So of having an international community of practice, well, that's the story that I'm going to tell you in a few minutes. But it also could be locally at your institution, this community of practice. But the virtual and online is enabling people to show up, and so you don't have that distance challenge to contend with. Some aspects to consider if you're going to do a community of practice is to think about, if we kind of go around the circle here, first the leadership. When you have a large group, that psychology of groups can be a challenge, where if there is no defined leader for the group, then everybody is going to assume that somebody else is going to take care of it, right? And so it's important to have a defined leadership, but it's also, as you'll see and we'll touch on later, important that that leadership is a very open leadership, that there's not a very hierarchical sense of things, but there definitely has to be a select number of people in charge and responsible for things. They may defer certain tasks, delegate them out, but it's important to have that leadership. Time and resources, this is something else that, is the people that are invested, the people that want to take this on, it's important that they have either the support from their group. I understand you might have a like the Department of International Affairs or Division of International Affairs may be developing or devoting resources and time to support certain activities. There might be individuals that are volunteering, but certainly it takes time to do these things. When I ran the tweet chat, it would probably take for our tweet chat each month, we probably spent, you know, somewhere between 2 and 5 hours preparing and working on creating a good experience for the group. The shared objectives, right? The group has to understand why are they coming together, and to be clear on that, because if your group is coming together and you're getting other people inserting things into the group. So, you know, if we're talking about education, but I'm showing up to the group and I'm really talking about my transfusion medicine work exclusively, that's not going to resonate with the group, and it's going to interfere with that cohesion of the group. And people are going to say, you know, when I started going to the group, it was really interesting, but you know, it's more about transfusion and blood, and I don't find that interesting, right? So I think understanding what that objective is and revisiting that. This idea of risk-free environment is really, really pivotal, and I want you to put a pin in this for your mind, because when we talk about what's creating this success, I think a big part of this is how are we making it a safe place? And you'll see this when I talk about what are the questions that I develop for the group to talk about, and how do we moderate when people show up to the group and express hostile opinions. It's very important that we self-police the group and make sure that people understand very publicly that certain behaviors are not acceptable in this group, despite it perhaps occurring in a public forum. And then lastly is measurements, because I think for a lot of us, this is how we can get additional resources. Either for some of us that might be working in academic positions where we might be reporting to a chair of our department or division, it's sometimes helpful to be able to talk about, maybe you're volunteering this, but what is the value of the effort that you're putting in here? What are we getting back, either in reputation, acclaim, or development of additional projects for our own division or department? And also for some of us with academic promotion, as we can show this as scholarly activity. But measurements are a nice thing to kind of document the group and also just celebrate the group's growth and what interesting ways that they're developing. So let me now tell you the story that I've been leading up to. So this was an effort of, the three of us. Myself, Alyssa Hall is the other small photo. Alyssa is a educator that works with me at Mayo Clinic. And then Teresa Soro is the large photo here, and she is a nurse educator in Sweden. And the three of us are the ones that developed this tweet chat community. And this was an idea with an in-person meeting. So this all started because we went to a course that was in person. This is one that, Adipong was one of our mentors at this course, and where we learned and spent about 15 days together learning how to be better educators. And it was really an exciting thing to see all these different people, very diverse group, people working in education from a lot of different angles, but we all had so much fun working together. This idea was born from the idea of we wanted to continue the conversation. We wanted to continue to learn from one another. And so that's what kind of really was the driving force on how can we continue this conversation. And that got us thinking, how are we going to create the same atmosphere that we have in person when we are not in person, right? Teresa lives in Sweden. I live in Minnesota. Adapong lives in Thailand. I mean, we're very separated geographically. And what we decided, and this is a tool that may change over time, but in its current state, the best tool that mimics conversation back and forth is Twitter, in my opinion, because you can have somebody share some bit of information and then somebody else can respond to that. But there can be many conversations occurring at the same time, and benefit even above and beyond that in-person experience. In a tweet chat using Twitter, the conversations can be revisited at different times. So in other words, it's like being able to have a conversation with some colleagues over here, and then a few hours later, you can go back over and revisit a conversation that already happened and add to that conversation. So that's why we picked this tool of Twitter. I mean, right now, this conversation, this is me talking to you. I suppose people could be using the chat and talking to one another, but that chat is a very linear chat, right? It doesn't have that same possibilities to follow different communication threads, different conversations. So we decided to use Twitter, and I think a lot of the magic in the experience, having developed multiple tweet chats with other professional groups that I work with, is this structure here. This idea of we're going to spend 1 hour and we are going to have 4 questions that we are going to discuss. And I think it's really a secret sauce to start out with, this first question just being something that is something that everybody can contribute to, that kind of shows their example. Like, for example, if in education we're talking about feedback for learners, right? We might start out the question with, what types of feedback do you give learners? And I give formative feedback, I give summative feedback. Other people might talk about, different aspects of feedback as learning, for learning. And it creates something that everybody can contribute to. The second question is we start diving into that topic of feedback a little bit, and let's analyze it. And so, then we can ask that question of, what do you think is the most challenging aspect of feedback for you? Or what are the most helpful components for your learners of when you give feedback? Right? Some way to start analyzing, looking deeper into the topic. And then question 3, let's really dive into a specific context, right? Because feedback, is a good tool in many situations, but, in some situations that may not work so well. Maybe to say, how do you give feedback when there's an emotionally charged event? Right? If the students are really worked up, how do you navigate that situation? And then question 4 is always a question of, where do we go from here, right? Based on this conversation, what do you think is lacking in feedback? Are there any projects that we could collaborate on as a group to research and share the story of how are we doing feedback, or how could we improve the quality of the feedback in our area. So when we plan the tweet chat, in addition to the questions, it starts off with what's going to be the topic that we're focusing on. I gave the idea of feedback. We're going to also think about who are special people that we need to invite to the conversation. I think this is also really pivotal, right? Because there are a lot of us, I bet probably everybody on this conversation right now would have something to share about feedback that would be meaningful to the group. But I also think that there are probably experts on feedback, at your university. And like that, those people would be really important to invite to that specific conversation, because that would help enrich the conversations that's happening. A lot of times the special people that we invite, they're the ones that are sharing some new perspectives, helping to keep those of us that aren't as expert in this particular area to learn what are some things that we should be thinking about that I might use in my context. The next thought is to think about what's the date? When are we going to do this? I've seen a lot of tweet chats get set up where the date is constantly in flux because it's getting moved based on how people are feeling, about, oh, I can't do this week, I'm on vacation, let's do it this week. Oh, let's cancel for this month, we'll do it next month. And when you have disruptions to that regularity, that really becomes a barrier to people participating. I've developed a couple tweet chats for professional societies that have that method of doing things, and quite commonly I'm surprised and often miss those opportunities, which is kind of embarrassing because I help plan a lot of it. But I think all of us that have participated in the Harvard Macy tweet chat, everybody, you could shine a light in our eyes at 3 o'clock in the morning and everybody would say, first Wednesday of the month, 9 p.m. Boston time, 1 hour. Everybody knows this. It happens all the time, even when it happens over a holiday. So I think it's quite the regularity. I think that's really important to cultivate and build, if at all possible. Next is moderators. So again, this would be people that you would have in the community that have this area of interest, because they're the ones that can really start leading this conversation. And also they might be those experts that we're inviting special as well. We ask them for a bio that we can tweet out. And then there's also facilitators. Now, sometimes people kind of get these words confused. That's natural. When I think about moderators, these are the people that are more expert in this topic that can lead a conversation. And then somebody like me, who's more of just a, not expert, but just jack of all trades, I can show up and add something to the conversation. So we have people who are on the leadership team usually, who show up and make an effort to respond as people are talking and ask people, oh, that's interesting. Can you tell me more? Oh, that's interesting. Can you give me an example about when you do that? Because a lot of times when people tweet, right, there is that size to keep the conversation. And so we can ask people for more information. We can ask people and say, oh, is that always true for you? How do you navigate that? How do you get support? And so facilitators play a good role about keeping a richness, or just in terms of number of conversations happening back and forth, which keeps it very engaging. And of course, keeping this overall goal of discussion in mind is really key, because as you see from these 4 questions, I've seen a lot of colleagues, as we put these questions down, people have things that they want to specifically ask that might be off target, just because they have an interest, right? And what I always tell them is, well, let's not have that be one of the official 4 questions. But if you want to ask people, go ahead and put that in the conversation yourself, because that's perfect, right? It gets into the conversation, the community sees your question, but we need to have the official questions for the group really be focused and on target, again, so that everybody is seeing value, because they're showing up because they are educators. Somebody else might be interested in simulation and have something specific to that, but keeping it focused is key. And then we have the people sign up for when are they going to be able to show up to this chat. And then also we keep track of, are there key resources that we want to share? Sometimes that's published papers, sometimes that's websites or tools that people use, but that's been something also that helps to keep the conversation rich and to help people see the value of why are they spending their time to show up, is they're learning about these resources that they didn't know were available to help us do act better, for example. So in case people aren't aware of a tweet and what that looks like, I just wanted to quickly show what one tweet looks like. So this is the person that is sharing this tweet, Tamara Simpkins. We see that she has a hashtag for the event. In this case, it's hashtag Mayo Clinic ETF. In our case, for the tweet chat, it's HMI chat. The hashtag is just a way to have the conversation pulled together. So I can go onto Twitter right now and I can search the hashtag HMI chat, and in reverse chronological order, I have the entire conversations that have ever been had by our group going all the way back to 2016. I mean, that's the beauty of this, and why I was able to get that tweet that Adipong sent out in 2021, and I found it very fast, right? Because I just searched HMI chat Adipong, and I see, some of the content that he's pushed into the conversation. So the hashtag is a key thing of the tweet chat. That's what allows everything to get pulled together and the conversation to be held together. And then sometimes you'll see in tweets people mention other users, and they're doing that by using this @ symbol. And what happens is that tags somebody so they get a notification. So for example, if this afternoon, if tomorrow morning, Adipong wanted to comment about this session tonight, he might say, something he gleaned from the session, and he might do the @Kreuter MD. And then when I this afternoon, see that notification pop up, I see that he has included me in that, and then I can respond to that. Maybe he thinks of a question that I didn't answer today, and that he tweets to me, and he wants me to respond. He adds my name to it so that I see it. And so this is the magic of Twitter and why we used it as a platform. During the tweet chat, I showed you that we have our 4 questions. We spend, at the very beginning of the hour, we introduce ourselves. And so we usually ask people if they're comfortable, share a photo. That is one way that we help to build community, right? Because people see each other in very different environments. A lot of times actually the last tweet chat, I shared a photo of myself cross-country skiing in Minnesota winter. Adipong is very famous in our community for showing gorgeous landscapes of Thailand, and makes us all very jealous of your country. But after we introduce ourselves, which is a very important community building activity, we have the first question go out at 5 minutes into the hour, the second question at 20 minutes, the third question at 35 minutes, and then the fourth question at 50 minutes. And then at the end, it's really a thank you to the moderators. There might be continuing conversations happening, but we don't want to keep people roped into the conversation afterwards, right? Because we're a community that comes together for a given amount of time, but we don't want to take additional time from people. And I think I've got an example here on the right where we see this back and forth of HMI chat that Adipong participated in that really highlights how this conversation goes. So Larry is an educator at the University of Ohio, and he has HMI chat. For me, there's also time for vertical and time for horizontal strategies with a given learner. Adipong, I agree, both are important. One caveat though, I think, is we don't do enough horizontal relationship. And then Leslie Shu, another educator, is saying, I'm starting to think more and more, how this trust relationship between faculty and learner is the same or different between doctor and patient, kind of thinking about that dynamics. And that Adipong adds to that even more so, thinking about these dynamics is quite different. So they can't be exactly the same. That said, there are some fundamentals and shares an image about this. And so you can see how this conversation and we're shaping each other, going back and forth and having an influence on each other. What happens with that tweet chat? And this is one example. This is a graphic I made earlier in the talk. I talked about it's important to have some way to measure success. And so this is kind of one of the earlier tweet chats we had. I sort of collected this example showing some of the key tweets that were shared and showing some of the important threaded conversations that were shared as well, just as an infographic for our community to see, wow, there actually is a rich conversation going on. This was something that I both shared on Twitter, right? But that's speaking to the choir, right? That's speaking to the educators that are already showing up. I also emailed it to all the Harvard Macy community so they could see what are they missing by not participating in the conversation. And I did that regularly those first several months so that people saw that they were missing out on something that was really wonderful. And so that's what we see here now is once we got it started, then we wanted to continue that. And what you're seeing here, and I'm showing, is spending time to cultivate that community feel, right? So that people are also modeling this behavior of saying, keeping in touch, right, with this community. Kamal saying, thank you, feeling so inspired by the ideas and amazing community of practice, hashtag HMI chat, right? So we are doing this as leadership for this group, always reinforcing, like every tweet chat I finish with, I'm so grateful for this community, and I'm always using that word explicitly to kind of reinforce this subtly. And then we see Kamal and Rosa, neither of them are involved in the leadership of HMI chat, but we see them adopting that language and feeling like the community that we are naming. And we show here, again, metrics of what does the growth look like. And I think what's important here for you guys to see is that this growth at first was very limited. We got our group showing up, and for several months, it was kind of a moderate number, and it would go up and it would go down. But with consistent efforts in growing the community, we really started taking off and having sustained growth, just like you see somebody practicing an instrument and achieving a new level of skill. We were developing a larger community, and we see this, going forward over time with those numbers, sometimes going up, sometimes going down. But on the whole, it really got to be quite a bit. We've had in the first 5 years of the community, we had 351 individual participants show up to our community and participate in the conversation. Almost 3,000 tweets in the first 5 years of the community. So really, really growing this to something, and it takes time. One of the natural ways that we were able to grow, and you might think about this for your setting, is how are you able to, what is a natural way for your community to grow? For us, the Harvard Macy group has a couple of different courses throughout the year. And what I'm showing you here is my computer screen where I couldn't be in Boston for this course, but they invited me to attend virtually, like I'm doing you here, and I would explain, hey, I bet you guys are all having a great time together in this room, learning from each other. Wouldn't you want to continue this conversation, continue these kinds of relationships when you go back home? And then that's one of the natural ways we were able to incrementally grow our community. And so you might think for yourself, are there natural periods where you're going to grow your community? I think about myself, there is the academic year. We get new students coming in, and I want to get them included in the conversations. You might have other ways that seem natural. We can also see collaboration happening. So within your institution, if you were to cultivate a community of practice, we can see people talking about fantastic exercise, failed simulation, and then another person tweeting in and saying, hey, this would be an excellent experiment. Could we design something? There have been a number of publications, so academic output that has come from collaborations of people coming together in this way that would not normally come together in this way. In this case, Javid and Keith are both Canadian, but Javid is a psychiatrist working in one part of the country, and Keith is a family medicine doc working in another part of the country. So in your case, it might be people from the same institution if you have one about medical educator, or to have one about educators. But you could still have people come together, because probably, like most institutions, we kind of live in our silos. I'm not as aware of what some of my colleagues in other departments and divisions are doing. If we had a way to come together, then I can learn what they're doing. And that's something as a community we do here as well. So these are, again, examples of where people are sharing and feeling like a community. They're doing things that are meaningful, planning for our residents, a project that they're working on with great results, curriculum and assessment that they're building. So that probably resonates with this group, as you guys are all educators. You know, these kinds of communities coming together, if they you may not find a collaborator to work with, but it also is a nice community to celebrate your success and to kind of have a little bit of accountability for the efforts that we're doing as well. And then, of course, like I say, highlighting this community and what it has become, we've got Ted Carrick responding to Adipong, you know, talking about, yeah, HMI chat, the best Wednesday of your every month. And Adipong, no kidding. HMI chat Wednesdays are the days, that 2 hours of my life that just whiz away, right? It goes fast. These are people, these are colleagues that are seeing value in communicating. And again, going back to, this is something that has sustained itself since 2016. There's been very little, the only investment from Harvard Macy was they paid to develop a web page so that their community was aware of this. And that's been the limit of their support. The numbers have really kind of speak for themselves. For those that are interested in transcripts and even seeing what's out there in the community, those, you know, are things that can be captured. And over those first 5 years, that's when I got this figure. There was over 40,000 tweets in this rich conversation. So that's my story of what I did with Harvard Macy, cultivating a tweet chat, how we do these monthly conversations. I think how we're very deliberate about how that conversation goes. We're not asking questions that have a right or a wrong answer. In fact, just last night, I'm teaching in a course in the evening, and somebody put in a question that had an absolutely a right or a wrong answer, and the students were pretty quiet. Right? We want things that all of us may not be experts in whatever the conversation is, but we want people feeling willing to show up and engage in the conversation, because that's what this 20 tweet speaks to, is multiple perspectives from different people doing different things, and that's the strength that comes. So in this last phase, I want to kind of talk about and emphasize a couple key aspects of what is leading to this success, in my view. This is kind of pulling from my experience doing community psychology at university, as well as how I've seen the Harvard Macy tweet chat succeed, and I have seen other tweet chats fail. I think I want to highlight a couple of things. First one being that developing that sense of membership is very important, right? So as I was showing there, I'm always adding to the conversation, explicitly saying, I'm so grateful for this community, so grateful for these different people that are contributing, always talking about each other, always using the word our community, so people feel that ownership and feel that sense of belonging, because ultimately this is all volunteer in our busy lives, so that people can feel this belonging and invest and use some of their discretionary effort. It's really important to keep emphasizing that, so people can feel that this is something they are investing in it, but they're getting something back out of it. Secondly, another thing to emphasize is kind of this influence. I talked about this in the beginning, that we need to have defined leaders so that things get done. But it's also really important with a community of practice, because in a community of practice, we are all experts. You are all education experts, but I'm willing to bet you all have a slightly different aspect that you are expert in. And so whoever might take on leadership roles, those members are very close to leadership. They definitely have input and things to say that result in influencing how the community goes. And I think it's really important, if you have a lot of experts as your members, that leadership is basically there to organize the system, but is really listening to the membership and lifting up membership. So a lot of our tweet chats, we would pull from members in the group that have been active participants and invite them to lead the next discussion. And many times they would invite somebody who is outside the community, who is an expert in the topic as well. But we would always have somebody that was a member of the group as a co-moderator for the session, right? Because again, people need to feel like this is our community, and it's something where they need to feel like they can influence what they're doing in the group. If people feel like they show up, but it doesn't matter what they say or how they try to contribute, people aren't going to show up anymore. They're not going to be using that discretionary time. In addition to this vertical influence, it's also really important that there is horizontal influence as well. So, we like to see, and this is something that Twitter enables, because Twitter allows multiple conversations occurring in parallel. where people can influence each other. I may be running the tweet chat, but there might be members that are collaborating and having a conversation and deciding that, hey, maybe we can collaborate, or hey, maybe we should invite you to our journal club because you have some different perspectives to share. So it's really that's another key thing for members to show up, because it's not just top-down leadership, but I'm showing up because of the person next to me, right? That's what we a lot of times hear in things, is that's what gels the group. My group here in transfusion medicine, one of the great things I love is they always have me covered if I need to take a vacation or something like that. We always show up for each other. And that's the same thing in this kind of a community. People need to feel like, wow, if I don't show up to that tweet chat, I'm not contributing to the group, and I know my other friends are, and I want to show up. Next thing I want to bring about is this idea of emotional connection. And again, this is where I think people are thinking about this community of practice as this amorphous thing. How we make it something real and tangible is, as I'm showing here, we've been talking a lot about how do people feel invested in a community. Also sharing important experiences and celebrations. So within the tweet chat, but also independently on their own. If somebody gets a new promotion or a new job, somebody has the birth of a child, all of these things are celebrated within the community. There is a specific, tweet that goes out that, says, congratulations, Justin, on, your daughter, or your publication of your article. And that is another way we are drawing in this idea of what is this special bond that we form. It's these little things, doing them consistently over time results in this very deep, meaningful connection where people are showing up 8 years after we created this event because they feel this, because they have had people giving them congratulations, they have been learning and contributing. And that's what gives this sense of community that is ultimately what needs to happen in order to have a community of practice. So going back to the beginning of my talk, talking about this community of practice is important because it's a lens, or it's a process to develop something that sustains itself, which is a little bit of a misnomer because I've just spent the last several slides showing you specific efforts that need to be taken. But to say that those efforts then pay off in all these people wanting to show up, wanting to continue the conversation, independent of the different challenges that happen in our daily lives. For example, we've had the tweet chat come over like national holidays just by blind luck, and still a lot of people will come and participate at those. I think that kind of results in something that I think a lot of us are looking for in our professional communities. So this community practice is a way forward. So just revisiting what my goals were, really recognizing this opportunity that is in front of all of us, of what could a community of practice mean for me? What could it mean for you? What could it mean for what you're trying to accomplish in your professional careers? And hopefully this story that I've shared you about how did we do it with this Harvard Macy group, which was really a grassroots with Adipong's mentorship in the beginning. How did this get going, get started, and how this is still continuing today? So I probably wanted to leave a little bit of time for questions and answers. So I'll leave that open, and I'll leave one more slide up for those of you that don't necessarily have a question now, but how you can have some reflective thought about, what did this mean to you, this conversation? Are there new ideas, new thoughts, new point of view that was shared? Are there some gems that you think that were in this presentation that really sit meaningful to you? Are there any new ideas that came about, or maybe you already had some ideas, but this presentation reminded you of those? And so I'll just leave this slide up as I take questions for people to think about and try to capture some of this learning that hopefully we've sparked with this talk.
Thank you so much, Dr. Justin Kreuter. That was very inspiring. And I have to say, I have lost touch with HMI chat a little bit. Last time I participated was 2 years ago, so it's time I went back. And while we wait for the questions to trickle in, I have something I'm curious to hear more. So one thing you did not mention a lot in your presentation was your chemistry between the three of you. You, Alyssa, and Teresa. I'm sure imagine if you three hadn't banded together, right? I'm sure we wouldn't have gotten the HMI chat that we have now, right? So how did it work? How did you get the chemistry going between the three of you?
It's a great question, and it actually speaks to we handed off, the three of us handed off leadership to a new group of 3 leaders after 5 years. So the last 3 years, it's been led by a different group, and it is still continuing today. And so to answer your question, really gets at when we were deciding that, hey, we've had a great run with 5 years, let's transition and get new ideas for the group. There was that process of identifying new leadership was very deliberate, and one of those aspects that was very thought out about, there were 2 aspects that were key for the new group. Number one is the diversity in that leadership group. So I'm a physician. Alyssa is a professional educator, non-physician, and Teresa is a nurse. And so having that diversity on leadership for our diverse community was important. And the other aspect that was important is because this is an international group, and like I say, Teresa is in Sweden, Alyssa and I are based in the US. The other important part was that the 3 people had to have an international presence. So the current group right now is, I believe it is, again, 2 people that are in the United States, and the 3rd person is based in Australia. And so that was the other aspect to the group. So I think obviously people need to work well together, but in terms of, for our group, we're a diverse group, and so we needed leadership to represent that, both in terms of professional background and international presence. And so for you, you might think about the group that you have, what are the stakeholders for that group, and thinking about having leadership representation from some of those different components.
Thank you. That's a very good answer. I appreciate that. Now open up the floor for anybody, any questions or comments. Yes, Dr. Natapal, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for your talk. It's very interesting, and actually it is what we are trying to do to build a community here. And I wonder, I mean, we have been trying to do some kind of these activities for quite some time, but your model is interesting in the sense that how could you get people involved in the chat, right? Because at the beginning, there might be just few people, but how could you make it expand into getting wider people into the community?
Yeah, it happened in two ways. I mentioned that idea of every time they had a new class happen, we would advertise to that class. But there was also this element of, because we were doing it in a public forum, we have examples of people that joined our community that have zero connection to Harvard Macy. Have never been to the course, have never experienced those conversations, but they are educators, and they saw what was happening with HMI chat. And so they would show up to the conversation. And when they would show up, I mentioned we have people usually in leadership roles that would be facilitators, and people like me would recognize when I would see a new name, somebody would introduce themselves. I would be very deliberate about, welcome to our HMI community. We really appreciate having your perspective in the conversation tonight. And, that usually would be sufficient to draw them into the conversation, and then for them to then see value that they were getting out of it. The group was getting stronger by their perspective being added, and then they were seeing the benefit of being exposed to new resources that they didn't even appreciate. So that's, again, one of the advantages of, I think, doing it in something of a public forum, so that we can be deliberate about welcoming new people to the group.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So if I don't see any questions, and I would like to, there's a question in the chat box. So Mr. Mubarak Muhammad says, thank you so much for this great, inspiring talk. Diverse community of experts that became connected from different parts of the world through tweets, hashtag on COVID-19. Could this be the new way of looking for collaborators for young academics like me? So I think the question is about how, maybe you have chats and then you have hashtags, and those are, the tools that people can use to find collaborators. What do you think?
Yeah, I do think so. And I would say, especially if you find yourself in if your research or academic effort is in a more unique area. So, for example, a lot of us in medical education feel a little bit alone within our larger departments. And so that's one of the reasons why it was a draw. I know for myself, if I put on my transfusion medicine hat, we're another group that most academic hospitals only have 1, 2, or 3 of people like me on their staff. And so we are also another small group, but Twitter has been a way for us to come together. And just to highlight, Twitter's the tool today and has been for the last several years, but it's just a tool. In the next couple of years, there might be a different way, a different platform that we're using to interact. The key is that it allows the type of conversation that your group is interested in. And so that's another thing to think about is what is the group interested in doing or sharing that might open up for a different platform that may work better. For example, we've seen maybe if you have a more, a group where we talk about the Pecha Kucha kind of talks, where those you have 20 slides and you have 20 seconds per slide. If you have a very visual thing and showing things amongst group, I could see that using a different platform, such as YouTube or Instagram or something else entirely. Twitter seemed to work for us because we were having this kind of what can mimic a conversation back and forth. But yeah, I think that social media enables people to come together in new ways. And I think that's a theme that I've seen in a lot of work lately, is some of the most interesting things come from cross collaborations.
Just want to make a slight remark that for people who are not used to Twitter, in a lot of like Western countries, there's this culture of having a Twitter account as your professional social media account. So they will have like, maybe you have a Facebook account, but that's personal. And then Twitter is your professional account. This is a culture that maybe we in Thailand still don't have, but we can foster it.
Thanks for highlighting.
Yeah, Ajahn Stephen, you raised your hand. Do you have a question? Ajahn Stephen?
Sorry about that. I'm having trouble with my headphones, so
It's okay.
The charge has disappeared, so I'm now having to use my speaker on my laptop, which isn't great. But first of all, thank you very much for your excellent presentation. I've gleaned an awful lot of information from it. Just going on from what you just mentioned about the platform that will be used, we may be looking at the metaverse in the future. Who knows? Where we have our own little avatars. And then we look nothing like what we really look like, but there we go. I'm just wondering about the startup number of people. If I'm looking at doing this at my school, initially I think I would be looking at our department, the foreign language department, so we all get a little bit of a taste, because at the moment we're using Line. And personally, I just think Line it's a social media thing, it's not a business tool. That's my opinion, and I like my opinion. So I don't actually use Line in we use it in the teachers group, the department group, and then we have so many different groups that I think if we developed one group that honed the one department, but then we have spin-off or splinter groups where we collaborate with other departments and have different hashtags for those. Is that the way that you think it should be run? Or is it a possible way it could be run?
First thought I have is I would be cautious about splintering the group with a lot of hashtags, because I think there might be potential in capturing that under one umbrella, or whatever the platform is, having that all come under one theme. It may be different. There may be slightly different communities of practice that use that space at different times. But I think bringing somebody to the whole, then you're more likely to reference the previous commenter's question. That's how we can draw in more people who can stumble into this and start to find interest and value. If we start to fragment, then that really, there isn't as much accidental discovery of the group. There isn't as much curiosity for other diversity of thoughts. I think the first part in your question, you were talking about what's a critical mass to get started. I don't know if it's so important to have a sheer number, but I think that a piece of advice might be having a few different distinct perspectives. And in your case, that may be having 2 or more different classes that are participating in it, just so there can be a little bit of diversity rather than, just your group getting together and having a conversation. That's probably going to be a little bit more insulated and closeted and not apt to grow as much as if you bring in some of that diversity.
Yeah. The thing that I would like to see is more of our members of the department actually participating and giving their opinion. Because I think what tends to happen, they sort of wait for me to voice everything because they know that I'm going to do it. And it's trying to get them, and I suppose this comes into the ensuring that they understand that it's a safe environment where they can make their opinions known. But for the past number of years, it's just me who just boo, boo, boo. And it's trying to make sure that they voice their own opinion. That many of them have the same opinion as I do, but they're just scared to say it.
I think, that's a keen insight to highlight for the larger group, right? Is to understand that all the power is wrapped up in the questions that we plan to ask. If we have questions that are asking right or wrong questions, right or wrong answers, people will keep quiet. In my work in transfusion medicine, there is a temptation for people to, ask those kind of gotcha questions. But I was very ferocious about deleting those if somebody would write that into a planning sheet and say, you can't ask this. This doesn't promote people sharing diversity. You have to have a more open question like, how do you deal with this challenge at your facility? And so I think one thought is to be very mindful of the questions that we ask. And the other insight, I think, from your question or statement there is the idea that saying that you have a safe environment does not necessarily make it so. We have to be examples of that, both by, I think, being vulnerable for ourselves. So a lot of my professional tweet chats, I am very much lay myself vulnerable and share my protocols and how do I deal with things, which I think a lot of people traditionally keep very private because they don't want to be criticized for how do they do it at their place. So I role model being vulnerable. And I also, when we see people be vulnerable, if somebody starts to go on the attack, myself and my colleagues are very quick to jump in and say that's not appropriate behavior. So again, the group sees that when that happens, that gets squashed. That's also really important for maintaining that safe environment, because saying it's safe is different from it actually being safe.
Yeah, understandable. Understand. Thank you.
So thank you very much, everyone. I'm sorry, but we will have to conclude this session. Maybe if Dr. Kreuter has some time, maybe he can stay and chat, but I would like to formally conclude this session. So thank you. Big thanks to Dr. Justin Kreuter for being our guest speaker today. We learned a lot. And, the biggest reason why I invited you here is because I plan to do the same thing over here, a tweet chat or some kind of monthly collaborating session. So we can have a continuous community of practice. And Dr. Nawarat is here, the Vice President in International Affairs, so she can conclude the session for me. Dr. Nawarat, please.
Ajahn Adipong, you can make the conclusion. I just like to thank the speaker. I enjoyed the session very much, but
thank you.
Time zone different. So I hope you forgive me that I am listening and eating at the same time. And I appreciate all the participants who joined us today, because it's 9 p.m. Thailand time and it's your morning time. And I appreciate we get together even with time zone different. And I also think when you said that you share with your colleagues in Australia and in other parts of the world, probably it's one of the challenging things is how to set up the time that every of us is still awake or not like eating or time to send kids to school, you know, these kind of things. But I also think that after COVID-19, our world is getting much smaller than before. It's more like no borders at all, and we can connect any part of the world, you know. So we should take advantage of this kind of thing. So I leave the stage for Ajahn Atipong, who is an expert, to make conclusion, but I really enjoy the session. And I hope we could do more. Ajahn Atipong ka?
Yes, sure. We can invite Justin as our advisor for our tweet chat. And so if any of you is interested in finding where talk more with Dr. Kreuter, you can find his Twitter handle on the screen. You can reach him there. And so thank you, everyone. Good night and good day.
Thank you.